So we're here today to talk about solving security's data problem. At the end of the day, no IT, no security problem was ever solved with less data. It's always the right data. But where is the right data? Where does that come from? And why is it always such a struggle? Fundamental issue is your rate of data is increasing dramatically faster than your budget. This is something I got to see up close and personal running large-scale SIMs for years. My data was going up 30, 40%. The worst thing I ever had was I get called into the principal's office, my CIO wants to know why I'm spending all this money, and I'm thinking to myself, our transaction volume is growing 150% year over year. You're lucky, buddy, that it's only growing, my log volume is only growing 30% year over year. But of course, that's just the nature. You always have to conform with the business. You have to admit, where's the money going to come from to pay for all this? Other big issue is volume, variety. The volume of data is increasing astronomically. Cloud service providers in particular, you're getting so much more data than you ever got before. And even though it's in decent formatting, it's lots of data. And then there's also now variety. Recently worked with a company who was saying, yes, we're going to plan our SIM migration, and we only have 28 data sources. And I'm thinking to myself, no, you probably have about 300. And this is so we're talking to them, and by the end of the project, about 6 months later, they actually had 400 different data sources. And so it creates a significant amount of complexity. And finally, value. Not all your data is created the same. And that's the problem these days with a modern security data strategy. You're forced to treat all your data the same. My data that drives the detections is treated just like data that's driving my compliance. And so this is where we're going to talk about ideas and how do you separate your data? How do you match cost and value? Let's talk about how we get here. It's been going on for years. We're always talking about the idea that we have to put our data all in one place to get value. It always provides that struggle. Okay, we're put our data all in one place, we're going to analyze it in one place, we're going to get value in one place. And this is all just doesn't work anymore. So we have to talk about doing things differently. And we talked about it for years, the idea of the whole big data era. We're going to bring data together, we're going to do Hadoop, data lakes. It is one problem after another. And this also comes in the idea that IT and security people are not necessarily data people. Managing data is a skill set, and the type of discipline that's been long brought into the business intelligence of the database sphere is only recently coming into the IT and security sphere. And this is where things have to change. Let's talk about the data you can't afford. I think that's a great example. There's so much signal, but you have to identify what do you really need versus what do you want versus what you actually need. And this is a real struggle. You look at all, and this goes back to so many data sources. Things are always changing. How do you track this down? How do you know what you want? And this is where we regularly talk through with customers classification. Spend the time to classify your data to understand what's meaningful, what's not meaningful. Have you mapped all your detection data to your detections? Do you know what's in scope? Because then that tells you everything that's not detection oriented is probably a little bit less important than those data sources. By the way, I didn't say this, but if someone has a question, please, let me hear you. And also we talk about the old thing about more data and more problems. As data expands, it creates compounding issues over time, especially as retention rates climb. It's very tough. Teams try to say, okay, we're going to run our security program off of 30 days. What happens if you don't detect your problem until 60 days? Where's that data going to come from? As it grows and grows, you have compounding issues, compounding with waste, false alerts, problems, the time. Think about everyone who's had an IR that's taken forever because you've had to restore data from 90, 60, a year ago, and it's so much data, it takes you weeks to get it back. That's always a lot of fun, especially when you're having to report to your board and to your C-level executives every hour your status, and your status for a couple of solid weeks is restoring data. And so that just creates its own set of challenges. This is where the idea that we're going to start talking about data tiering. This is where it's critically important. Use your classifications of data to now decide what's going to be important and consider splitting up your data. The idea of what do you know you need, so typically detections, immediate incident response, data you use every day. Data that's maybe that you're going to use. This goes to the idea that you put this into your data lake. And so when you start thinking about what kind of data fits into these categories, start looking at how you use your data. You run your reports and say, okay, this is the data that we use every day, every hour. This is what our reports run on. This is what our incident response runs on. This is what our SOAR runs on. Versus data that you're only touching once or twice a week. Think about moving that data to your data lake. But the next most important question, and what a lot of people forget, is what are data you don't touch at all? It's rare when I go to work with a customer, we start looking at their data and easily find 15 or 20% of the data that's in their SIM hasn't been touched in the last 90 days. If you're not using that data, you have to really ask yourself, why is it there? So this is consider at least moving that data into your data lake, at the least, if not also putting that data into your deep archive. AWS Glacier is a great place to store data that you don't necessarily want to use, but you have to retain. But it's really important, understand how you use your data. So this is something we're more than happy to help you with, but go through this exercise, not just once, but at least every month, if not quarterly, just keep that up and understand it. So this way, you can always be as efficient as possible. And so this is something that we really pride ourselves at Cribl to give yourself that ability, using a telemetry pipeline based upon classifications. Now you can easily route your data where it needs to go. And just to give you an idea why this matters, just everyone's contract is a little bit different, but it's not unusual for a SIM to be about $1 a gig. You can put that same data into a typical data lake at 20 cents a gig. So now from a cost basis standpoint, dramatically changed the game. The idea that now I can put 5x the amount of data that I put into my data lake that I can put in my SIM for the same price. So now that opens up a world of possible options for you. And even more so if you start moving data into Glacier. So now it's exponential, 10, 20x more data for the same price. And from a leadership perspective, stabilizing your cost is very important. You can make a very strong business argument that if I can flatten out my spend, I can maintain what I'm doing. I don't necessarily have to spend less. But the biggest thing to think of is just control your spend, forecast your spend. And so this is a way to get more data for the same amount of money. The oldest problem in security is I got 10 terabytes of data and 5 terabytes of license. How do I work this out? And this is how you do it. Let's all talk about data you can't see. And this is also issues around quality. I frequently we frequently have conversations with companies around less data. I like to talk about better data. No security problem is ever solved with less data. So let's talk about how we can improve your data quality, give you more visibility. I love this field because it's a huge, great explanation, the idea, especially with a high quality asset and identity program of who is this person. And this is a great way to talk about how in most organizations, the identity of a person is expressed in a multitude of ways. There's not just one way. So it's important to understand that have a strong asset and identity program to do this, and it's all about data quality. This is a foundational issue. Everyone's been through it where you're having an incident response and you're having trouble responding because you don't know the who, you don't know the what, and you don't know when the where. It all starts with your asset identity program. Let's talk about the data you can't use as well. And this is another great example. Data that you just doesn't have any meaning. This is where I always talk about what's the value of enrichment? How can we make this data better? Very old story that I had, this was years ago when I got started in this process. I sat down with a SOC analyst and I said, show me what you do when you open up a case. Dude opens up a case, event comes in, pulls out 21 browser tabs to understand, was this case worthy of doing something with? Of all this context shifting, SeamDB, looking up in the vulnerability scanner, who owns this? All these different questions. And it was a good solid hour of context switching to finally make a decision. And this is a great example of the value of high quality data. So what we did was I sat down with my team, it was like, how can we get rid of the browser tabs? So this is where we use a combination of enriching data in the telemetry pipeline and also SOAR to give it every time there's a case, a complete answer. So less browser tabs, faster decision making, better decision making. Because false positives are a killer, but also the context switching of trying to find out what you're doing, it leads to burnout, it drives people crazy. So it helps work-life balance. It really helps the ability to just process information and get things done faster. And finally, a big element also is it helps onboard new analysts faster. Typically, analysts are shuffling in and out of SOC pretty quickly. You don't have time for someone to just learn everything and know it and be able to look at it. You want to be able to help even a junior analyst make a quality decision. And this talk about also what got you to 2025 won't get you to 2035. This is the idea that we always talk about with data tiering. Familiar concepts, even though they're familiar, they're comfortable, can't afford them anymore. And it's always a problem. No one likes the idea of saying, I have a SIM, I have a data lake. But I always have to ask you the question is, can you afford to not have that? Can you afford to have a SIM that doesn't have all the data you need to answer your questions? And this is where we try to tease apart those use cases and get your SIM focused on detections and move your other use cases into your data lake. And so that's where we have a conversation about data modernization. Fundamental qualities of data. This is another issue we see all the time. Why does IT and security data not have the same fundamental importance to the business that your BI program does? Your BI program has this endless schemas and standards, have hundreds of people literally dedicated to the data of the business. And that if someone went out and changed the format that impacted the end-of-day reporting, there's going to be hell to pay. But if someone makes a change that impacts your data and your formats and your security, more often than not, that's treated with a shoulder shrug. So this data is just as important. It has to have the same planning, the same rigor, and the same thought behind it. In order to have a comprehensive set of answers of how do we secure the business, how do we collect, how do we keep the business safe, and also how do we stay efficient. Always think about being efficient and effective. So I always talk about the future in terms of the idea of data strategy. And this is where we start talking about, what does it mean to you? How do you do this? How do you clean this up? Think about your architecture. Think about the things that drive you crazy. Agents are a great example. Let's start about simplifying your data collection, where you produce an event once and share it everywhere it needs to be shared, even if it's in different formats. No more duplicating agents. No more having a firewall that has 12 different feeds coming out of it in order to support different parts of your business. Think about all the CPU that's burned up trying to duplicate data across the business. Instead, produce that event once, use a high-quality telemetry pipeline like Cribl Stream, and then be able to share that data. Always then focus on your data quality. Normalize it. This is one thing I'm really excited about as you started working with AI-based OCF mapping. So now you can take all the different types of data that you have and without a whole lot of effort, map that to a common schema. Put that data into your data lake, and now the format differences start to disappear. Always think about how are we going to have reporting to understand once we onboard data, now that we know that there's issue, we know that the data is standard, it hasn't changed. That the technical term is drift. How do you detect that? There's always things to think about. Also talk about your sensitive data. How do you manage that? How do you manage data sovereignty? And these are where we start building that strategy for getting more value out of your data. Always remember, collecting data is a cost. Storing data is a cost. The values in analytics. A well-prepared data strategy can help you spend less time on collection, less engineering time on collection, and spend more time on analytics. This is something with my team that was just probably the most breathtaking thing. It's like 2018-ish when we started implementing Cribl, was I was able to take 80% of my engineering time, who was previously dedicated to collecting data because we were maintaining this massive open source stack. We were able to thin this down, get rid of duplicate agents, get rid of about half the hardware we're using, and then automate it. And now within a year, I'm shifting 80% of that time over into now getting more value from my tools. So now we're able to run ML models, detections, anomaly detection baselines, things we would have never had the time to do otherwise. But because we simplified our collection, took all that pain out, we were able to now restore data and share data everywhere. This all comes back to that comprehensive planning. And so let's also talk about a roadmap. This is something that's just, I think is really underestimated. I talk to leaders about this and say, yeah, absolutely, we're going to start a project to do this. And I try to set the expectation is, this cannot be a project, it has to be a culture change. You have to constantly be looking at your data, understanding your data, reporting on your data, put controls in place. Work with your GRC team, for example, that if you find an issue with data controls, you're now feeding it back to the GRC team to then chase it down, issue findings, and get a remediation schedule. Always work with the greater business to work on your data. It has to be a team sport. Your team can't be the one doing it. I'm a big fan of using the GRC process. Put their annoying superpowers into work for you. This is something I remember getting I would always have all sorts of findings on my, I had to deal with, and I was like, how can I use these guys to do what I need to get done? And this is because we had tried for years. Just like, I would tell the app team, hey, this app log you have, it doesn't have the right data, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. So we were able to then work with them. Now I have the GRC team chasing it down. You become the coordinator. Work with everyone else in your business to get this done. And this also comes back to why you need a strategy. And then look at your data maturity model. Think about where you are and where you want to be. The most common place is somewhere in between patchwork and efficiency. You're trying your best. You want to get in strategic value. But this is where in order to get forward, in order to get to the end towards strategic value, you've got to have a plan. And also a multi-year plan. Think about you're turning a very large ship 1 degree at a time. Have that middle model. You're working together, you're building over time, you're working with data formats. And so it's lots of small wins. I can't stress this because this kind of thing just doesn't change. Think about how many formats you have, and over time, you're going to bring in new data sources. Biggest thing I see is bringing in app logging now. Lots of security teams looking at app logging. And so now your scope of data has gotten even bigger. So just have this long-term view, and it's important. Don't try to do it yourself. Recruit the rest of your business. And also separating your analysis from your retention. This is another from a strategy standpoint. Always have your retention in your own storage. Amazon Security Lake is a great example. There you go. S3 is another great place to go. The idea is that vendor-neutral formats are the key. This was another great win for my team was because we could use something like Cribl Replay to pull data out of our data lake, we are now able to share it across the business. Data that's shared across the business has more business value. You're now able to talk about we're bringing value to the business, we're not just a cost. And there's all sorts of interesting things you can do as you grow your profile in the business because now you're part of the business, you're providing data. Nothing I did pissed off people in the business more when I renamed my team from the Splunk team to the IT and security analytics team and just trying to change that narrative of what we did for the business. So think about it's progress, it's process, it's people. It's not just tools, it's not just the destination. So always look at your data for value. Always keep looking, what can we do with this data to bring value? There's a million pieces that you can do, and more than happy to share. We're going to be back in the booth. Also engage, leave your name, we'll set up a meeting, we'll talk through how you can turn your IT and security data into value across the business. This is one of the fun quotes. The idea is that we're able to just solve more problems. This is another great team. They had a observability vendor that gave them a quote for 3x more. 5 weeks before renewal, because they had Cribl Stream in place, they were able to transition from one vendor to another in 5 weeks. So they didn't have to pay that 3x quote. And that's because they had a strategic plan for how they were going to handle their business. And so it was really enlightening. It's the idea that because they had that data strategy in place, they were able to move forward and be agile. I want to thank you very much for your time. We have a couple minutes if you have questions, but thank you, and please come to the booth. We're right over there. Thank you.